Hi viewers, it's me Satya from Shutterpix.in. Today we are going to see what is ND filter, what are its type, how to use them and an buying guide. Let's begin. Neutral density filter, commonly called ND filter, can be treated as a cooling glass for our lens. They filter out the light that enters into the lens and then censor only a fraction of light into it. The fraction that is allowed depends on the rating of the filter. Usually they are called ND2, ND8, and ND32 and so on. This number next to it represents the stops of light that reduces. ND2 actually filters out the light by one stop. ND8 reduces the light by 3 stops and so on. In the definition, I said all the light, meaning all frequencies of light. So there should be filters that filter out only a specific frequency. Yes, they are. UV filter outs only the UV part of the light and sends rest of the light as is, 100% of them, and then cut down 100% of the UV light. Similarly, there are other filters called clear filter, which doesn't filter anything. It sends all the light as is to the lens. The purpose of clear filter is the protection for our lens. It could protect our lens from dust, scratches, and so on. Just a protector. It doesn't make any modifications. Graduated neutral density filter (GND). They have a graduation in the sense like one portion of the filter is have a very high filtering level, the other portion is zero filtering, and then there is a gradual change from this level to this. And GND filters, graduated neutral density filters, are used for taking horizon photos of horizon where sky meets the land. Usually in those scenarios the land would be kind of properly illuminated, the sky would be overexposed. To control that, GND filters are used. There is one more type of filter called variable neutral density filter. They have a range of filtering capacity. In the beginning, I mentioned ND2, ND8, and so on, right? Like those filter, a single piece of filter could filter only one level of filtering capacity, but VND will have a range. By adjusting a dial in that, it could filter from range, let's say ND2 to ND32. It could filter out various levels of light by adjusting the dial in it. Why we should use ND filters? While describing GND filters, I mentioned casually that they are used to reduce the exposure. You might have a question. We already have three variables in the exposure triangle which controls the exposure. Why do we need one more piece of glass that plays a role in this exposure? Yes, I'll give you a scenario where we would need. Let's say we are shooting video in outdoor broad daylight. In the exposure triangle, shutter speed is fixed. It's dependent on the frame rate of the video. So that is fixed. And then let's say we want to have a shallow depth of field, and then like wide open, we are using a very high aperture, let's say f2.8. That is also fixed. Let's say in this scenario, since it is broad daylight, we reduce the ISO to a minimum level, let's say 100. Even then the scene is overexposed. What to do? How to bring down the exposure? That's when ND filters come handy. We fix a ND filter in front of the lens, which cuts down the light, effectively making the ISO less than 100. One thing we have to notice is ND filters don't bring any creative change to the exposure, meaning it doesn't alter the shutter speed and then like sharpness or blurriness of the image. It doesn't alter the depth of field. It is equivalent to reducing the ISO to a lowest value, lowermost value, or even bringing down less than the lower value. Or it's just like ISO, which doesn't have a creative effect on the image, just adjust the exposure level. It could be used in images also where we need long exposure. In images like this, the water is very smooth. That is because of long exposure. Usually in those scenarios, we'll have very high depth of field to have everything in focus, and might be we might be using f11 or f16 or even f22. And then shutter speed should be longer. In those cases, sometimes we might have the shutter speed and the shutter duration in the magnitude of seconds. Certain scenes might require a shutter duration of, let's say, 5 seconds, 10 seconds, or even 15 seconds. And ISO is always kept lower. Usually in those cases, ISO is like already reduced to, let's say, 100. Even then the scene might be overexposed because of the very long shutter duration. In order to control the exposure, ND filters are used. I mentioned rating of the ND filters as ND2, ND8 and so on. They represent stops of light. So in the long exposure case, let's say for a given setting of ISO and aperture, we have a certain shutter speed. Okay, we get a proper exposure. In order to extend the shutter speed, if we use ND8, the shutter duration can be increased by 8 times. Let's say the proper exposure is achieved at by 1 by 1/20th of a second. Now, by using an ND8, which is a 3-stop filter, reduces the light by 3 stops, we could extend the shutter duration by 8 times of that. If we still want even a longer duration, we should go for ND64 or ND32 and so on. And in the case of video, it depends on the aperture. So in our case, the shutter duration is fixed and then ISO is already minimum at 100. We want to shoot at f2.8. Let's say the proper exposure is achieved at f22. The difference, the number of stops of difference between these two values should be translated to appropriate ND filter. Probably you could start with some random guess of ND filter. Probably you can stack them up and achieve the required exposure level. Buying guide, how we should choose our ND filter. We know our camera sees the world through lens and the quality of the lens dictates the output quality. So now we are going to put one more piece of glass in front of the lens. So it should also be of high quality. Price is one indication of quality. So never compromise for a budget friendly filter which might impact your final image quality. Go for a decent brand and decent price, and within a brand, if there are multiple series of filters, choose the one that you could afford and then go with it. Second no is variable ND filters. They operate in a range and it might be very attractive that like you have continuous range from, let's say, ND2 to ND32 and you have all values one filter that solves the complete problem. We should understand how variable ND filters work. There were two polarized glass arranged in front of them. If they are parallel, the value of ND is low. They let lot of light. And if we rotate these two glasses, and when they became orthogonal, we reach the maximum level of the ND, let's say ND32 in our case. This produces an effect called X vignetting. So your final image will have a X kind of a mark vignetting in the image. This is unavoidable and this is a technical challenge. Most of the companies are trying to reduce it. They usually appear at higher level of the ND range. So companies are working to minimize it, but it cannot be avoided. Let's say if you have ND2 to ND32, at ND2 it will not be visible. As you increase the range and make it ND8, 16, they slowly start appearing. And then at ND2, ND32 it would be heavily visible. So avoid variable ND filters. Better go with a single rated ND filter, and that would work best. Another good option is stackable ND filters. So usually we connect these filters through the filter thread in front of our lens. Usually only one filter could be attached to the lens. So let's say we have ND8, only it could be attached. This magnetically stackable ND filter, we attach a magnetic holder to the lens and then any number of filters could be stacked to it. Let's say we start with ND8 and we feel it is not sufficient and it could be reduced by one more stop. So we could attach ND2 to it. We have a stack of ND8 and ND2 which results in ND16 value. With actually having only two filter, we produce 3 filter combination. So it's better to go with stackable option where you can have all low values, which by stacking you get an higher value of filtering. Hope you find this video useful. If so, give a like and subscribe to see many such videos. If you have any thoughts or questions around ND filter, share them in the comments. See you in another video. Bye.